Chapter 1. The Client in the Fog, from the Reminiscences of Dr. John H. Watson. It was in the late autumn of 1893, a season when London seems draped in perpetual twilight, that I once more found myself in Baker Street, seated opposite my friend Sherlock Holmes as the fog rolled past the windows in pale, shifting veils. The familiar crackle of the fire, the faint scent of tobacco, and the scatter of chemical apparatus upon the mantelpiece all contributed to that singular atmosphere which, to me, has ever been the essence of our shared adventures. Holmes sat, as was his custom, half reclined in the armchair, his long, nervous fingers steepled beneath his chin, and his sharp grey eyes fixed upon the dancing flames. A violin lay across his knees, though he had not touched it for some time. His mood was one of restless introspection. "You have that look again, Holmes," said I, setting down my medical journal. "The look of a man to whom the world has become intolerably simple." "Indeed, Watson," he murmured with a faint smile. "Simplicity is a form of stagnation. I had almost hoped for an earthquake to provide the morning's diversion. But alas, the only tremor in London is the rattle of cab wheels upon damp cobblestones." Before I could reply, there came a rapid knock at the door, 3 urgent raps, followed by a pause and a 4th tentative tap. Holmes raised an eyebrow. "You hear that, Watson? The rhythm of distress. Mrs. Hudson would not knock thus, nor would Lestrade. Our visitor is nervous, uncertain, but compelled." "Then perhaps fortune smiles upon your ennui," said I, rising. "Or upon yours," he returned with a smile. "Be so good as to admit our guest." I crossed the room and opened the door. A swirl of cold fog entered, and out of it stepped a woman heavily veiled and cloaked in mourning attire. Her hands clutched the handle of her umbrella with white-knuckled force, and her breathing was quickened, as though she had fled some unseen pursuer. "Pray, come in, madam," said Holmes gently, rising and motioning toward the chair by the fire. "You are chilled to the bone. Allow me to offer the warmth of our humble hearth." She hesitated, glanced about the room with anxious eyes, and finally seated herself. Her voice, when she spoke, trembled like a harp string. "Mr. Holmes, I am ashamed to intrude upon you unannounced, but I did not know where else to turn. I have been told that you can see what others cannot." "Merely the obvious, madam," said Holmes, "which so many choose to overlook. You are most welcome here. I am Sherlock Holmes. This is my friend and chronicler, Dr. Watson. And to whom do we have the honor of speaking?" "My name," said she, after a moment's hesitation, "is Mrs. Agatha Fenwick. I am the widow of Colonel Arthur Fenwick of the King's Own Rifles." Holmes inclined his head gravely. "I recall the name. A distinguished officer. Fell at Kandahar, did he not?" "Indeed. 5 years ago this month." Holmes's gaze sharpened. "And what brings the widow of a soldier to Baker Street on such a night?" "It is a matter, Mr. Holmes," she whispered, "which concerns both the living and—" she faltered, "and what may not be entirely dead." Watson, the practical physician in me, could not restrain an involuntary movement. "You refer to some superstition, perhaps? A haunting?" Her gloved hands twisted upon her lap. "I beg you not to think me mad, doctor. I myself do not know what to believe. Yet I have heard it, seen it, and others have too. There is a presence in my home." Holmes had not moved a muscle. His face was perfectly composed, but I could tell from the glint in his eye that the phrase "a presence in my home" had seized his full attention. "Continue, Mrs. Fenwick," he said quietly. "My husband's estate, Greystone Hall, stands near Richmond, upon a rise overlooking the Thames. It is an old house, Jacobean in part, though later enlarged, with a great glass conservatory at the rear that was his pride. He had it built after our return from India, to house his collection of rare orchids and tropical specimens. Since his death it has remained largely closed, save for the gardener's occasional attention. But 3 weeks ago strange things began to occur. At first it was merely the sound of footsteps at night, slow, deliberate steps across the tiled floor of the conservatory. Then one of the maids swore she saw a figure standing within, its face obscured by the foliage, its outline faintly luminous in the moonlight. She fainted, and has since refused to enter that part of the house. 2 nights later, my butler, Mr. Sims, found the door of the conservatory unlocked, though I myself had bolted it earlier that evening. He swore he heard the faint strains of my late husband's favourite military march being played on the old gramophone within. Yet when he entered there was nothing, save for a broken orchid pot and the scent of burning tobacco. Holmes leaned forward. "Tobacco, you say? What variety?" "I cannot say, sir, only that it was not my husband's usual blend. I recall that scent well, for it used to cling to his uniform." Holmes tapped his fingers together thoughtfully. "And has anyone else reported these phenomena?" "Yes, Mr. Holmes. 2 nights ago I myself was awakened by the same music. I went down trembling, but compelled to know the truth. Through the glass I saw—" Her voice broke. "I saw my husband standing amidst the orchids, his uniform immaculate, his face pale as ivory. I cried out, and the vision vanished as if it had never been." A long silence followed. The clock upon the mantel ticked solemnly. Holmes's gaze did not waver from her face. "When you say vanished," he said at last, "do you mean that the figure withdrew, or that it evaporated?" "It was simply gone, sir. The music ceased, the door remained locked, and I found no trace within." Holmes rose and walked to the window. The fog outside glowed faintly orange from the street lamps, like the surface of some living thing. "Mrs. Fenwick," he said at length, "you have done well to come. Though I do not share the public's fascination with apparitions, I do have a deep interest in human deception, whether intentional or otherwise. Might I inquire if there is anyone who benefits from the disturbances at Greystone Hall?" Her lips trembled. "There is, perhaps. My late husband's nephew, Mr. Lionel Fenwick. He is his heir in part, though I retain the house and a small income for life. He has pressed me to sell the estate, a proposal I have refused." "Indeed." Holmes turned, his eyes alight. "You have, I trust, not given him a key to the conservatory?" "Certainly not." "Then we shall see, Watson, whether your ghost plays by earthly rules." I saw that look, the spark that meant the chase had begun. "Mrs. Fenwick," said Holmes, "I shall accompany you to Richmond tomorrow morning. Kindly leave your address with Mrs. Hudson. In the meantime, I advise you to keep your servants near and your courage nearer. Ghosts seldom withstand daylight." She rose, visibly relieved. "Oh, Mr. Holmes, if only you can bring peace to Greystone Hall." Holmes bowed slightly. "Peace, madam, is often a matter of illumination. Good evening." When she had gone, he stood for several minutes in silence, his gaze lost in the fog. "Well, Holmes," I asked, "what do you make of it?" He smiled faintly. "I make of it, my dear Watson, that a ghost who smells of tobacco and plays military marches at midnight is a most practical sort of phantom. I think we shall find flesh and blood behind the ectoplasm." And with that he reached for his violin, drew the bow across the strings, and filled the room with the first notes of a melancholy waltz. A prelude, as I was later to learn, to one of the strangest cases of our long acquaintance, the ghost in the conservatory. Chapter 2. The Journey to Greystone Hall, from the Reminiscences of Dr. John H. Watson. The following morning dawned as dull and colourless as a pewter plate. A chill mist lay upon London, blurring the outlines of the lamp-posts and rendering every hansom cab that passed along Baker Street a ghostly silhouette in motion. Yet within the cheerful warmth of our sitting-room, Sherlock Holmes was already fully dressed for travel, his long grey ulster buttoned to the throat, the inevitable deerstalker hat in hand, and his keen eyes glinting with that alertness which no weather could obscure. I had barely finished my breakfast when he turned abruptly from the window. "Watson, the game is afoot." "So soon?" said I, startled by his brisk tone. "Indeed. Mrs. Fenwick has sent her carriage to meet us at Richmond Station. The lady's urgency suggests a household under considerable strain, a fact that seldom fails to draw out interesting contradictions. Bring your revolver, my dear fellow. While I do not anticipate violence, the presence of an alleged ghost often conceals a far more solid danger." I smiled. "You think, then, that the apparition has human agency behind it?" "I think, Watson," said Holmes, fastening his gloves, "that we shall find human agency behind most apparitions, provided we look with clear eyes. Ghosts, like certain diseases, thrive only in the shadows of ignorance." We took the morning train from Waterloo, and as the suburbs of London slid past in a blur of soot and chimney smoke, Holmes sat silent, his head bowed, eyes closed, fingers drumming lightly upon his knee. I knew better than to disturb him. This peculiar stillness, half trance, half concentration, was often the prelude to his most lucid deductions. At last he spoke. "Watson, did you observe the detail of the widow's gloves?" "I cannot say that I did." "They were of black kid, well worn but neatly mended at the thumb. That single mend was done by her own hand, not by a professional. The thread was dark brown, not black, which tells us she has more pride than means, a circumstance inconsistent with her position as the mistress of a large estate. Thus we may infer that Colonel Fenwick's affairs were less prosperous than they appeared." "Surely you do not suspect the lady herself of deceit?" "Deceit?" "No. Omission, perhaps. People seldom tell the truth, Watson. They merely omit the portions they consider unflattering." He lapsed once more into silence, and I turned my gaze toward the passing scenery, rows of modest villas giving way to open meadows veiled in mist. The air grew cleaner, the horizon wider. When at last the train slowed into Richmond Station, a landau bearing the Fenwick crest stood waiting at the platform. Mrs. Fenwick received us with evident relief. In the cold light of day she appeared younger than I had first supposed. A woman of perhaps 35, her features delicate but drawn with fatigue. Her eyes bore the telltale redness of sleepless nights. "I cannot tell you how grateful I am, Mr. Holmes," she said as we climbed into the carriage. "Since last evening I have scarcely dared close my eyes." "Then we must hope," Holmes replied, "that daylight will prove as potent an ally as deduction." The drive to Greystone Hall took us along winding country lanes bordered by skeletal hedgerows and mist-laden oaks. Presently the house came into view, a sombre pile of grey stone, its gables and chimneys outlined against the dull sky like the turrets of some brooding fortress. The Thames glimmered faintly in the distance, a ribbon of pale silver beneath the fog. Even before we alighted, I could sense an atmosphere of unease. The gravel of the drive was unswept, the lawns unkempt, and the great front door stood slightly ajar, as though the house itself were reluctant to close upon its secrets. A stout, ruddy-faced man in a butler's livery stepped forward to greet us. "This is Mr. Sims, my butler," said Mrs. Fenwick. "Good morning, sir," said the man, bowing. His manner was respectful but uneasy, and I fancied his eyes darted more often than necessary toward the shuttered windows of the conservatory that jutted from the rear of the house. Holmes gave him a single, searching glance, the sort that might have stripped a man's conscience bare, and then turned to our hostess. "Before we begin, Mrs. Fenwick, I must ask that the household remain exactly as it was last night. I wish to examine the scene under its natural conditions." "You mentioned that the disturbances occur chiefly in the conservatory?" "Yes, Mr. Holmes. Would you care to see it now?" "Presently, but first a word with your staff." Within a few minutes we had gathered in the great entrance hall. The butler Sims, a nervous housemaid named Ellen, and the elderly gardener, Mr. Wilkes, whose hands were roughened by decades of labor. Holmes questioned each in turn with his usual precision, gentle yet relentless. From these brief interviews emerged a curious pattern. The footsteps, the music, the faint light, all were said to manifest shortly after midnight. The gardener had found the glass door to the conservatory unlocked on 2 occasions, though he swore he had secured it earlier each evening. The maid declared she had seen a figure pale as the moon moving among the orchids. "And you, Mr. Sims?" Holmes inquired. The butler cleared his throat uneasily. "I've served the family 20 years, sir. I don't take fright easily, but when I heard the Colonel's march playing in that empty room—" Well, I'll not deny my blood ran cold. I swear to you, sir, there was no one there. Holmes regarded him keenly. And the gramophone? Where is it kept? In the conservatory itself, sir. 'Twas the Colonel's doing. He liked to listen while tending his plants. Holmes's lips curved faintly. A curious arrangement. I think, Watson, we shall find that the Colonel's fondness for music will aid us even in death. He requested that Mrs. Fenwick show us the room in question. The conservatory, when we entered it, proved to be a magnificent chamber. A vast glass structure appended to the rear of the house, filled with a forest of drooping ferns, palms, and orchids. The air within was heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying blossoms. Through the misted panes, the grey daylight filtered like smoke. Holmes walked slowly among the plants, his eyes roving over every detail: the tiled floor, the overturned pots, the brass watering cans, the polished brass stand upon which rested the old gramophone. "Note, Watson," he said softly, "how the dust upon this instrument has been disturbed in a circular pattern. Someone has recently wound it." I bent closer. "By Jove, you're right." He crouched, examining the floor near the gramophone. "And here, footprints. Small, narrow. A woman's, perhaps, though not Mrs. Fenwick's, I think. The heel marks are square, consistent with housemaid's boots. But look, overlaying them are larger prints, very faint, as though made by a man wearing soft-soled shoes. Sims, perhaps," I suggested. Holmes shook his head. "Sims wears heavy outdoor boots. No, these are of another kind. Perhaps a visitor, perhaps an intruder. Observe also the ash upon the floor. Cigarette, not pipe, and not an English brand. The tobacco is darker, aromatic, possibly Turkish." He straightened, his expression one of quiet satisfaction. "Watson, our phantom is acquiring substance. A tobacco-smoking ghost who winds gramophones and wears soft-soled shoes is, I think, a ghost who pays cab fares." Mrs. Fenwick clutched the edge of a table. "Then, you think someone human has been in this room?" "Indubitably," said Holmes. "And recently. Tell me, Mrs. Fenwick, who among your acquaintances smokes Turkish cigarettes?" She looked startled. "Why, only my nephew, Lionel. He spent several years in Constantinople before returning to England. But surely you do not imagine—" "I imagine nothing," said Holmes. "I merely observe. Mr. Lionel Fenwick resides here, I believe. He keeps a set of rooms in the east wing, but is seldom at home." "Then we shall look in upon him presently." Holmes's examination continued for nearly half an hour. He inspected the locks, the hinges of the glass doors, even the arrangement of the plants. At one point he drew from the soil a small scrap of paper, water-stained but legible. No, 7. After midnight. He pocketed it without comment. When we at last emerged into the hall, the afternoon light was waning, and a fresh fog crept in from the river. Holmes turned to me with that peculiar gleam which heralded discovery. "Well, Watson," he said softly, "I think we have glimpsed the outline of our ghost. Tonight we shall see whether he chooses to perform again. I would advise you to sleep soundly until midnight, for I suspect the hours thereafter will be of great interest." And as the chill wind moaned through the chimneys of Greystone Hall, I could not shake the feeling that the house itself awaited, with a dread anticipation, the return of its spectral visitor. Chapter 3. Midnight in the Glass House. From the Reminiscences of Dr. John H. Watson. Dinner that evening at Greystone Hall was a subdued affair. Mrs. Fenwick, though she did her utmost to appear composed, could not disguise the nervous tension that pervaded her manner. She scarcely touched her food, and often glanced toward the tall windows where the encroaching fog pressed like a living thing against the glass. Holmes, on the other hand, seemed to thrive upon the atmosphere of unease. He ate sparingly, spoke little, and watched everything: the flicker of the candles, the servants' movements, even the faint draught that stirred the draperies. Mr. Lionel Fenwick, the nephew, joined us part way through the meal. He was a man of about 30, tall, well-groomed, and possessed of a certain easy confidence which I found at once engaging and suspicious. His eyes were sharp and restless, his mouth a trifle too ready to smile. "My dear aunt," said he, taking his seat, "I did not know we expected company. Mr. Holmes the detective, is it not? And Dr. Watson? I've read of your exploits in the papers." Holmes inclined his head politely. "A regrettable habit of the press, sir, to turn honest work into sensational narrative." "Ah," said Lionel with a laugh, "but the public loves its heroes. And its ghosts, I dare say. You've come about our family phantom, I take it?" Holmes regarded him with a level gaze. "We have come about certain disturbances, yes. Have you yourself witnessed anything of the sort?" The young man gave a careless shrug. No, I leave the ghosts to the ladies and the servants. The old house creaks, the wind howls, and someone imagines a soldier walking among the orchids. I fancy it's nothing that could not be explained by moonlight and nerves." Holmes's smile was thin. "A most rational explanation, Mr. Fenwick. I am always gratified to meet a fellow materialist." Lionel raised his glass in a mock salute. "Then we shall get on famously." Yet as I observed him more closely, I fancied that his light manner concealed an undercurrent of unease. His eyes flicked once or twice toward his aunt, and I noted that Mrs. Fenwick did not meet his gaze. When dinner was concluded and we retired to the drawing-room, Holmes excused himself briefly and vanished into the shadows of the corridor. "He never can sit still," I remarked, attempting to reassure our hostess. "His mind is forever at work." Mrs. Fenwick smiled faintly. "I only pray his cleverness can rid this house of its dread." When Holmes returned, his expression betrayed nothing, but I fancied there was a new alertness about him, that peculiar brightness of eye which always heralded discovery. He drew me aside as the clock struck 10. "Watson," he whispered, "our friend Lichinol smokes Turkish cigarettes, as I surmised. Observe the faint scent upon his cuff. The same blend I found in the conservatory. Yet the man is no fool. He knows I have detected it. We must be cautious. I propose we keep watch tonight from within the conservatory itself." "You think he will appear?" Holmes's eyes gleamed. "If he does not, someone else will. And that, my dear fellow, is precisely what I intend to determine." By 11 o'clock the household had retired. The corridors of Greystone Hall lay in silence, save for the occasional creak of ancient timbers and the distant sigh of wind along the eaves. Holmes and I, equipped with a dark lantern and my revolver, made our way softly down the grand staircase. He moved with a cat-like grace that astonished me, even after years of acquaintance. The conservatory loomed before us like a glass cathedral swallowed by darkness. Through the misted panes the moonlight shimmered faintly, revealing the shapes of ferns and vines that seemed to stir of their own accord. Holmes closed the door behind us and turned the key without sound. "We shall take our position behind that bank of palms," he murmured. "From there we command a full view of the entrance and the gramophone." We extinguished the lantern and waited. Minutes passed, perhaps half an hour, during which the silence grew so profound that I could hear the faint ticking of my own watch. My eye, straining through the gloom, began to imagine movements among the plants, pale forms that seemed to glide and vanish. I reminded myself sternly that shadows are treacherous counselors. Suddenly Holmes's hand tightened on my arm. "Hush," he whispered. From somewhere near the far end of the glass house came a faint metallic click, the sound unmistakable to any ear accustomed to such matters, of a key turning in a lock. Then soft footsteps on the tiles. Through the drifting vapor I discerned a figure moving among the orchids, tall, erect, and unmistakably clad in what appeared to be a military tunic. The moonlight caught upon its buttons and glimmered faintly upon its pale face. My heart leapt violently. "Good heavens, Holmes," I breathed. "It is the Colonel." But Holmes did not move. His eyes were fixed upon the apparition with an intensity almost inhuman. The figure paused before the gramophone. There was a faint whir, and suddenly the strains of a military march, bold, rhythmic, and curiously distorted, filled the conservatory. The sound echoed eerily beneath the glass dome. At that instant Holmes sprang from our hiding place. "Hold there!" he cried. The figure turned sharply, and for the briefest second the illusion was perfect. The proud bearing, the pale moustached face, the gleam of medals upon the breast. Then, with a motion too swift for a phantom, it darted toward the side door. Holmes was upon it in a bound. There came the sound of a struggle, a muffled cry, and the clatter of a chair overturned. I rushed forward, lantern blazing. The light revealed a scene of utter astonishment. Holmes, triumphant, held in his grasp, not a ghost, but a man in a tattered uniform jacket, his features concealed by a rubber mask painted in ghastly likeness of the late Colonel Fenwick. Beneath the mask, the captive's eyes glared with fury and fear. "Watson, the light!" cried Holmes. I swung the lantern fully upon the intruder. He was young, slim, and bore a distinct resemblance to Lionel Fenwick, though the expression upon his face was coarser, more desperate. "Holmes," I said in astonishment, "he looks—" "Precisely," said Holmes. "He looks like Mr. Lionel Fenwick, yet is not he. An intriguing complication." The man wrenched violently, but Holmes's grip was iron. From the intruder's pocket he drew a small key and a half-empty case of Turkish cigarettes. "So," said Holmes softly, "our ghost smokes after all. Tell me, my good fellow, who sent you here? Speak, or I shall be forced to deliver you to the nearest constable." The man's only reply was a hoarse laugh. "You'll learn soon enough," he muttered. "He'll see you both ruined." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "He? I see. Then our ghost obeys orders. Very well. Watson, we shall let our friend consider the value of silence in the pantry under lock and key. I believe Mrs. Fenwick will not object to our using her scullery as a temporary cell." Within minutes the intruder was safely confined. Holmes turned to me, his face pale but alight with suppressed excitement. "Watson," he said quietly, "we stand upon the threshold of a singular deception. Our midnight visitor is but a pawn. The hand that moves him is the true phantom of Greystone Hall, and before tomorrow's dawn I mean to know whose hand it is." Outside the wind rose in a long, mournful sigh, rattling the glass panes of the conservatory. Somewhere in the distance a dog began to howl. Holmes extinguished the lantern and straightened his coat. "Come, my dear fellow," he said, "we have work yet to do before the ghost retires." Chapter 4. The Mask and the Nephew. From the Reminiscences of Dr. John H. Watson. When I look back upon that strange night at Greystone Hall, I recall it as one of the most curious mixtures of the eerie and the commonplace that ever came within my experience. There we stood, Holmes and I, in the cold glass-walled conservatory, the lantern light flickering across the ghastly rubber mask of a dead soldier, and the pale, sullen face of the man who had worn it. It was a tableau worthy of the theatre, save that the terror upon the fellow's countenance was all too real. Holmes wasted not a moment. "Watson, assist me. We must secure him before he finds his tongue." The intruder struggled as we marched him down the corridor, but Holmes's grasp was like a vice. The man's breath came short and hard, and though he said nothing further, I saw that his eyes darted about with the furtive alertness of a trapped animal seeking escape. Mrs. Fenwick, who had been roused by the commotion, met us at the foot of the staircase, her face white with alarm. "Mr. Holmes! Doctor! What on earth—" "Compose yourself, madam," Holmes interrupted briskly. "Your ghost has been unmasked. Quite literally. The man is no spectre, though his work has been of the most diabolical cleverness." She stared at the captive, her hand pressed to her throat. "I have never seen him before in my life." "Indeed? Then his presence here requires explanation, which I intend to obtain forthwith." We locked the prisoner in the small scullery adjoining the servants' quarters, and Holmes stationed Sims, the butler, to keep watch with instructions that no one was to enter or leave without his direct permission. Then, taking me by the arm, he drew me into the library. There he threw himself into a chair, lit his pipe, and stared into the fire. "Well, Watson," he said at length, "our ghost has feet of clay, and perhaps a patron of silver. You believe him to be in the pay of Lionel Fenwick?" Holmes blew a thin stream of smoke. "My dear fellow, consider the evidence. Turkish tobacco, a military disguise, a nightly haunting designed to terrify a woman into abandoning her home. Who profits if she does so? The heir, of course, but before we pass judgment we must hear what Mr. Lionel Fenwick himself has to say." He rang the bell. "Ask Mr. Lionel Fenwick to join us," he told the footman. A few minutes later the young man entered, fully dressed despite the late hour. There was no trace of surprise in his manner, only an air of guarded curiosity. "You wish to see me, Mr. Holmes?" "Indeed. Please be seated." Holmes's tone was courteous, even bland, but I knew that beneath it lay the keenest of traps. "I regret to disturb your rest, but I thought it best to speak while the night's events are still fresh." Lionel raised an eyebrow. "Then you've caught your ghost?" Holmes's lips curved slightly. "We have. He is, I fear, of the terrestrial variety. A man disguised as your late uncle." For a moment the young man's mask of composure faltered. "A man? Here? In this house?" "Precisely. He is now under lock and key, but before we proceed perhaps you can enlighten us as to who he might be." Lionel's eyes flickered. "I have no idea. None whatsoever." Holmes regarded him steadily. "Come, sir. You will not deny that certain circumstances point unpleasantly in your direction. The intruder smokes the same cigarettes as yourself. He possesses a key to the conservatory. He has gone to great lengths to produce a spectacle that would drive your aunt from her home, a result which I understand would prove financially advantageous to you." Lionel's color rose sharply. "Mr. Holmes, are you accusing me of conspiring to frighten my own kin?" "I accuse no one," said Holmes coldly. "I merely state facts. But facts, when they converge, have an eloquence all their own." For a moment the young man's defiance faltered, and I thought he would speak. Then his expression hardened. "You go too far, sir. I will not sit here to be insulted." He rose abruptly. Holmes's voice, calm and iron, halted him at the door. "Sit down, Mr. Fenwick." Something in the quiet authority of that tone compelled obedience. Lionel hesitated, then resumed his seat. "Very good," said Holmes softly. "Now, before you protest further, allow me to show you something." He drew from his pocket the scrap of paper we had found in the conservatory, the one bearing the words, Gnome 7, after midnight. "Do you recognize this?" Lionel's eyes widened involuntarily before he mastered himself. "No. Should I?" "Perhaps not, yet it was discovered in your aunt's conservatory, and written, as I believe, in your hand." "That is absurd." Holmes leaned forward, his eyes half closed. "You were educated at Harrow, were you not? Your manner of forming the numeral 7, with a crossbar, is peculiar to that school. I have examined a letter of yours in the hall table, addressed to your banker. The handwriting is identical." For the first time Lionel seemed truly shaken. You went through my correspondence?" "I examined what lay in plain sight," said Holmes smoothly. "Now let us spare ourselves further fencing. Who is the man you employed to play the ghost?" "I tell you I know nothing of him." Holmes sighed, rose, and walked to the window. The moonlight fell across his sharp features like the edge of a blade. "Very well," he said. "We shall let the man himself speak. Watson, bring our captive." When we entered the scullery a moment later, we found the door ajar and the room empty. The window, which had been bolted, now stood wide open. The night air poured in, heavy with mist. "Gone," I cried. Holmes's eyes flashed. "Gone, and with assistance. Observe the marks on the sill. A rope lowered from above. There is a confederate in the house." Mrs. Fenwick, who had followed us, gave a low cry of dismay. "Then we are not safe even here." "Courage, madam," said Holmes briskly. "The enemy has shown his hand. Flight is often the prelude to capture. Come, Watson, to the library. We must act swiftly." Within moments, Holmes had spread a map of the estate upon the table. His eyes moved rapidly across it. "There, the river path behind the greenhouse. If I were fleeing pursuit with knowledge of the grounds, I would take that route. Watson, fetch your revolver. Mr. Fenwick, you will accompany us." "Me?" said Lionel, paling. "Surely the police." "The police will come when I summon them," said Holmes curtly. "Until then, I require your presence. I have found that the guilty are most easily unmasked when they stand beside their own work." We stepped out into the cold night. The fog hung thick about the gardens, muffling all sound. Somewhere in the distance an owl hooted mournfully. Our lanterns cut pale tunnels through the darkness as we made our way toward the glass house. Halfway down the path, Holmes halted abruptly. "Listen." Through the stillness came the faint splash of oars. We ran forward to the riverbank, just in time to glimpse the outline of a small boat vanishing into the mist. "Too late," I murmured. "Not entirely," said Holmes, stooping. His quick eyes had caught something gleaming in the mud, a silver cigarette case, engraved with the initials L.F. He held it up in the lantern light and turned to Lionel, whose face had gone ashen. "Curious," said Holmes softly. "You seem to drop your property in the most incriminating places, Mr. Fenwick. Shall I take this as coincidence?" Lionel swallowed hard. I was by the river earlier this evening. I must have—" "Enough," said Holmes sharply. "Watson, our course is clear. Tomorrow we shall summon Inspector Lestrade, but before then, I have one more experiment to make. If my reasoning is correct, the Conservatory itself still holds the final word in this affair." He turned toward the looming glass house, its panes gleaming dully through the fog. "And when that word is spoken," he added, "we shall see whether the dead truly walk, or whether the living merely wear their faces." Chapter 5. The Secret of the Conservatory. From the Reminiscences of Dr. John H. Watson. It was approaching 2 o'clock in the morning when Holmes and I, lanterns in hand, re-entered the conservatory. The house had grown still, save for the occasional creak of old timbers and the sighing of the wind about the eaves. Mrs. Fenwick had retired to her chamber under our assurance of safety, and Lionel Fenwick, still under a cloud of suspicion, had withdrawn to the study, there to await whatever revelations Holmes might bring to light. The glass house itself was a dim cavern of shadows and reflections. Moisture hung in the air. The leaves of exotic plants glimmered faintly like a jungle beneath the moon. The soil was dark and heavy with the scent of decay. Holmes moved noiselessly from one end of the chamber to the other, his lantern beam darting over the tiled floor and glass walls with the restless precision of a surgeon's scalpel. "You recall, Watson," said he at length, "that Mrs. Fenwick described seeing the ghost appear precisely here, between the orchid stand and the door leading to the garden." "Yes," said I, indicating the spot. "The same position where we apprehended our intruder." "Quite. Yet, as you observed, the appearance of the thing was remarkable. The form seemed to materialize out of the very air, accompanied by a faint phosphorescent glow. No lantern, no candle, no reflection. A spectral light, Watson, and therefore an illusion." He crouched and began tapping at the floor tiles with the end of his walking stick. After a moment, there came a hollow sound. "Ah!" With a deft motion, he produced a small knife and pried loose one of the tiles. Beneath it, set cunningly into the foundation, was a shallow recess containing a narrow metal box. Holmes opened it and drew forth a coil of thin copper wire. "An electric current, by Jove!" I exclaimed. Holmes smiled faintly. "Precisely. Observe the wire's direction. It runs upward through the base of the wall, toward the lantern sconce above the orchids. Now, Watson, kindly extinguish your lamp." I obeyed. At once the chamber plunged into darkness, save for a pale, ghastly glow that issued from the far wall. It was faint, wavering, yet distinctly human in outline. I started involuntarily. "Holmes! The ghost!" "Not quite," he murmured. "The projection of one." He relit his lantern and revealed a curious contrivance concealed behind a lattice of ferns. A concave mirror, half-silvered, mounted before a small electric bulb, powered by the very wires he had discovered. Upon the glass was painted with some luminous substance the likeness of an elderly man, unmistakably that of the late Colonel Fenwick. Holmes examined it with evident admiration. A clever device. When the current is engaged, the painted face appears to float in mid-air, magnified and distorted by the mist on the glass. Add the soldier's uniform upon our masked friend, and you have your apparition complete. The result would terrify even the most rational observer. But who could have contrived such an elaborate trick? I asked. Someone with a knowledge of optics and electricity, and a motive strong enough to justify the risk. The nephew Lionel fits both requirements. He studied engineering at Cambridge, and is the sole heir should his aunt abandon the estate. Yet I confess, Watson, I find the performance almost too polished for so clumsy an actor. There may be another hand behind the scenes. He closed the box and replaced the tile carefully. Let us leave things as we found them. The trap is nearly ready to be sprung. Holmes straightened and began pacing. The man who escaped tonight will return. Mark me well, Watson. He fled not in terror but in design. There are papers, perhaps a key or some proof of collusion hidden here. If he believes his secret undiscovered, he will come again before dawn. Then we shall watch for him. Exactly. I propose a silent vigil. You will take position behind the palm near the entrance. I shall conceal myself among the orchids. Keep your revolver ready, but do not fire unless I call your name. I prefer my quarry alive. Thus began one of the most suspenseful vigils I can recall in our long association. The minutes dragged on in oppressive silence. The lantern was extinguished. The moonlight alone filtered dimly through the misted panes, casting long spectral shadows across the floor. From my position I could see the faint gleam of Holmes's profile as he crouched motionless among the plants. Time seemed suspended. The air grew colder. I could hear the steady drip of condensation from the roof. Then, a sound. A faint scrape of metal at the far window. Another. The latch moved. Slowly the pane swung inward, and a dark figure slipped inside. I recognized the outline instantly. The same man we had seized before. He crept across the floor with feline stealth, heading straight for the concealed panel Holmes had uncovered earlier. Before I could move, a whisper cut through the silence. "Steady, Watson." Holmes rose like a wraith, striking a match. The sudden flare illuminated the intruder's face, pale, tense, desperate. "Well, my friend," said Holmes coolly, "you seem singularly drawn to this conservatory. I trust you did not return merely for a change of air." The man's eyes widened in terror. For a moment he seemed about to bolt, but Holmes's revolver appeared in an instant. "Hands up. I think we may dispense with further theatrics." At that instant a new voice rang from the doorway, sharp, authoritative, and unmistakable. "Hold your fire, Holmes. Scotland Yard. Inspector Lestrade." The lantern light flooded the room, revealing Lestrade himself, followed by 2 constables. "Well, bless my soul," I cried. "How on earth—" Lestrade gave a short, triumphant chuckle. "Received a wire from London, Doctor. A tip-off from a certain Mr. Lionel Fenwick, who claimed his aunt's house was beset by thieves. Thought I'd better look in." Holmes's face remained impassive, though I saw the faintest glint of irony in his eyes. "Indeed? Then perhaps Mr. Fenwick has been of more service to justice than he knows. Inspector, you may take this man into custody. He is wanted for burglary, and I suspect conspiracy." The captive said nothing, but as Lestrade's men seized him, he turned toward Lionel Fenwick, who had followed close behind, his expression rigid. "You promised me safe passage," the prisoner hissed. "You said—" "Silence!" cried Lionel. But it was too late. Holmes's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. "Thank you," he said softly. "That will do very well." Holmes spent the remainder of the night in quiet examination of the conservatory and its devices. I, for my part, could only marvel at the extraordinary web of deceit we had uncovered, and at the strange duplicity of the nephew, who had both summoned the police and betrayed himself in a single act. Yet Holmes, far from satisfied, seemed oddly restless. "There is something more, Watson," he murmured as dawnlight filtered through the glass. "This scheme is too elaborate, too costly for the mere inheritance of a country house. No, there lies beneath it a deeper motive, and I mean to find it." Chapter 6. The Colonel's Secret Will, from the Reminiscences of Dr. John H. Watson. The morning that followed was one of those cold, pallid dawns peculiar to the English countryside in autumn. A thin mist drifted over the lawns of Greystone Hall, and the dew lay like a fine lace upon the hedgerows. Inside, however, the air was anything but tranquil. Inspector Lestrade had spent the better part of the night taking statements, dispatching telegrams, and questioning servants, while the captured intruder, whose name we now learned was Arthur Cobb, a discharged artillery sergeant, sat in surly silence in the butler's pantry under guard. Lionel Fenwick had made a perfunctory attempt at indignation, declaring that Cobb was a stranger and a rogue, but the tremor in his voice told its own tale. Holmes, meanwhile, had remained aloof from the commotion. After a light breakfast, which he consumed in brooding silence, he retired to the conservatory once more, carrying nothing but his pipe and a magnifying lens. I joined him shortly after, finding him crouched near the base of a marble statue of Venus that stood amidst the orchids. "Holmes," said I, "Lestrade believes we have the whole affair in hand. Cobb will confess before the day is out, and Lionel Fenwick's part in the matter seems clear enough." Holmes gave a faint snort. "My dear Watson, Lestrade's certainties are as brittle as spun glass. No, this affair has layers yet unpeeled. Observe." He indicated the base of the statue, where a narrow crack ran along the marble plinth. He tapped it lightly with his knuckles. The sound that returned was hollow. "Remarkable," I murmured. "A cavity beneath." "Precisely. A concealed compartment, one which our late colonel evidently regarded as safer than any bank. Hand me that knife, if you please." With delicate precision, Holmes inserted the blade into the seam and twisted. The marble front came away in a single slab, revealing a small recess lined with oilskin. Inside lay a roll of papers tied with a faded blue ribbon, and beside it a small key of antique pattern. Holmes's eyes glittered as he drew the bundle out. "Watson, I have long since ceased to be astonished at the ingenuity of the human instinct for secrecy. Let us see what treasures the old soldier deemed worth hiding from his kin." He untied the ribbon and unfolded the outermost sheet. The handwriting was firm but slightly tremulous, and the heading read, "Last Will and Testament of Colonel Horace Fenwick, late of the 22nd Regiment." Holmes gave a low whistle. "A second will, as I suspected." The document, though brief, contained a revelation that stunned us both. Whereas the publicly known will, drafted some 5 years earlier, had left the entirety of Greystone Hall and its income to Mrs. Arabella Fenwick, with remainder to her nephew Lionel, this newer testament, dated only a month before the colonel's death, made quite different provision. "To my dear wife Arabella I leave the annuity of £100 per annum for her comfort. The estate of Greystone Hall and all remaining properties I bequeath to my son, Henry Alcroft, issue of my marriage prior to that with my present wife, whose existence I have heretofore concealed." Holmes read the clause aloud twice, his brow furrowed in thought. "Good heavens!" I exclaimed. "Then the colonel had a secret son." "Precisely, and mark you, such a revelation, if known, would cast Lionel Fenwick from heir to beggar in a stroke. The motive for a plot becomes infinitely stronger." He turned to the remaining papers, which proved to be letters written in the colonel's hand, addressed to one Henry Alcroft, Ceylon. The tone was affectionate but guarded, speaking of reconciliation and restoring what is rightfully yours. The last was dated only a week before the colonel's death. Holmes replaced the papers and sat for some time in deep reflection, the smoke from his pipe curling upward in lazy spirals. "It fits together, Watson," he said at last. "The ghostly manifestations, designed to terrify Mrs. Fenwick into flight. The electric contrivance, expensive and requiring skill. The ex-soldier Cobb, likely hired to impersonate the dead colonel, all to ensure that no one would pry too closely into the colonel's affairs before Lionel could secure the inheritance. But there remains the question of how the will was discovered, or rather, how our conspirators suspected its existence. Perhaps the colonel hinted at it before his death." Holmes shook his head. Doubtful. The secret compartment was concealed too perfectly. No, Watson. Someone had foreknowledge. Someone who helped the colonel hide it. He rose abruptly. Come, let us speak with Mrs. Fenwick. We found the widow seated by the drawing-room fire, pale and wan but composed. She greeted Holmes with a faint smile of gratitude. You have brought peace to my house, Mr. Holmes, she said. The horror that has haunted me these nights is over, I hope. For the moment, yes, replied Holmes. But before we may lay this matter fully to rest, I must ask you one or two questions of a personal nature. Your late husband, did he ever speak of a former marriage? She looked up sharply. A former? No, never. I was under the belief that I was his only wife. Did he ever correspond with anyone abroad, say in Ceylon? Her brows knitted. Now that you mention it, there were occasional letters from Colombo. He said they concerned some small investment. Tea, I believe. He burned them after reading. I thought nothing of it. Holmes nodded slowly. I see. He turned toward me as we left the room. Watson, the circle tightens. The hidden son in Ceylon, the frightened widow, the grasping nephew, and the soldier who plays ghost for pay. Each thread touches the other. I shall telegraph Mycroft at once to inquire about Henry Alcroft's whereabouts. If he yet lives, we may have our final piece. That evening, a wire arrived from Mycroft Holmes at the Diogenes Club. Alcroft returned London, sept last. Present address, Bloomfield, St. Whitechapel. No occupation, good character. Holmes studied the message in silence, then folded it carefully. Watson, said he, we must return to London at once. Our missing heir walks among us, and I fancy that when we find him we shall learn that the ghost of Greystone Hall was but a shadow cast by living greed. The next morning we took the early train to London, with Lestrade promising to hold Lionel and his accomplice pending Holmes's return. As the smoke of the countryside gave way to the sooty sprawl of the metropolis, I could not help but feel that the case, far from nearing its conclusion, had only just begun. Holmes sat opposite me, chin resting upon his hand, eyes half closed, the very picture of abstraction. But when I spoke his name, he opened them suddenly, and I saw there the cold gleam of purpose I knew so well. There is something unfinished here, Watson, he murmured. Something that smells not of mere avarice, but of fear. The Colonel's fear. I mean to learn what it was. Chapter 7th. The Man from Whitechapel. From the Reminiscences of Dr. John H. Watson. It was one of those raw October mornings when the city wears its most sullen aspect, the streets glistening from an overnight drizzle, the air heavy with the mingled scents of coal smoke and damp stone. The hansom carried us eastward from Baker Street through a maze of narrow lanes where the pavements were already alive with the traffic of London's working class. Holmes, wrapped in his long grey ulster, sat motionless beside me, his sharp profile thrown into relief against the murky light. He had spoken scarcely a dozen words since breakfast, yet I could sense in him that peculiar alertness which always heralded some critical development in a case. At last we turned into Bloomfield Street, a crooked thoroughfare skirting the edge of Whitechapel. The houses here were mean and close-packed, their windows grimy, their doors marked with the shabby respectability of genteel poverty. The cab drew up before number 14, a narrow 3-story lodging house with peeling green shutters. Holmes dismissed the driver and mounted the steps. He knocked twice, sharply. The door was opened by a small, stooping woman with a pinched face and red hands. "Mr. Henry Alcroft?" Holmes asked. "Yes, sir. 3rd floor, back room," said she, eyeing us suspiciously. "He's a quiet one. Pays regular. You're not from the police, I hope?" "Not at present," Holmes returned dryly, and without further ado we climbed the stairs. At the top landing, Holmes paused, listening. A faint cough sounded from within the indicated room. He rapped lightly, and a voice, firm but weary, bade us enter. The man who rose to greet us was of middle height and perhaps 40 years of age. His clothes, though plain, were scrupulously neat. His face, bronzed and lined by tropical sun, bore that air of quiet endurance peculiar to men who have worked long under foreign skies. There was nothing of the criminal or adventurer about him. Indeed, his eyes were steady and direct. "Mr. Henry Alcroft," said Holmes. "I am he." "And you, sir?" "My name is Sherlock Holmes. This is my friend, Dr. Watson. We come upon a matter concerning your late father, Colonel Horace Fenwick." The man's expression changed at once. "My father," he said in a low voice. "Then you know?" "Something," replied Holmes, seating himself uninvited. "We know that the colonel concealed from the world the existence of an earlier marriage and of a son, yourself, whom he had not seen these many years. We also know that he drew up a new will naming you heir to his estate. Unfortunately, that document was never brought to light, until very recently." Alcroft's hands tightened upon the chair-back. "Then it is true," he murmured. "I had long suspected as much, though I never sought to press a claim. When my mother died, I was but a child. My father made some provision for me, then left for India. I heard little from him save an occasional remittance and a letter of kind words. Some months ago he wrote that he meant to make all right again, and bade me return to England. But when I landed at Southampton, I learned he was already dead." "And since then?" asked Holmes quietly. "I came to London, took this lodging, and waited. I wrote to Mrs. Fenwick, but received no reply. I concluded that my father's intentions had not been made known to her, and I had neither means nor heart to pursue the matter." Holmes regarded him closely. "You made no effort to visit Greystone Hall?" A faint flush rose to the man's cheeks. "Sir, I was uncertain of my welcome, and to be candid, I had heard rumors that the place was haunted. I am a practical man, but such tales dissuade one from intruding upon strangers." Holmes's lips curved slightly. "A wise restraint. Yet those very apparitions were devised to keep you away." He proceeded to outline in his concise manner the events at Greystone Hall, the spectral manifestations, the soldier's disguise, Lionel's duplicity, and the discovery of the will. Alcroft listened intently, his face grave and pale. When Holmes finished, he said simply, "Then my cousin sought to rob me of my inheritance, and used the memory of my father's face to do it. It is monstrous." Holmes inclined his head. "Monstrous, yes, but also curious. For consider, Mr. Alcroft, Lionel could not have known of the will unless some third party revealed it. Who then had knowledge of its existence?" "I cannot say," Alcroft replied slowly, unless my father spoke of it in Ceylon. There was a man who served as his secretary during his final year there. A certain Mr. Ezra Harker, an engineer by training. I recall him distinctly, for my father trusted him greatly." Holmes's eyes sharpened. "Harker? An engineer, you say? Electrical experience?" "Indeed, he designed irrigation pumps for the colonial works, but after my father's death he vanished. I heard he had returned to England." Holmes rose abruptly. "Watson, we have our ghost's invisible hand. The electric devices at Greystone Hall bear the touch of a professional, not a dabbler. Harker is the missing link, the mind behind Lionel's crude execution." He turned to Alcroft. "One final question, sir. Did your father ever mention to you a small iron key?" Alcroft frowned in thought. "Yes. He wore one upon a chain about his neck. When I asked its purpose, he laughed and said it kept his sins safe." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "That key is now in my possession. I fancy, Watson, that it unlocks more than a mere box." He extended his hand to Alcroft. "Mr. Alcroft, you must accompany us to Baker Street. There are steps to be taken if you are to secure your rightful inheritance, and to expose those who conspired against you." That afternoon found us once again in our familiar sitting room at Baker Street. Holmes had laid out the colonel's will, the letters, and the key upon the table. As he paced before the fire, his mind worked with visible intensity. "Watson," he said suddenly, "do you recall the design of the safe in the colonel's study? The one set into the paneling behind the desk?" "I do. The keyhole was strangely narrow, more like that of a jewel case than a strong box." "Precisely. And we were told that it had not been opened since the colonel's death." Now consider. Why hide a second will in the conservatory, yet leave a locked safe untouched? What if that safe contains not money or deeds, but evidence concerning the true cause of the colonel's death? I started. His death? But he died of a seizure, did he not? So it was said. Holmes replied grimly. Yet I have examined the coroner's report. No post-mortem was performed. The physician, a local man of limited means, certified death from natural causes after a single cursory glance. But what if the seizure were induced? Poison? I whispered. Holmes nodded. It would not be the first time an inheritance has been hastened by chemistry. The colonel was found in his study, alone, a glass of brandy half drunk beside him. Lionel was in the house that night. Cobb, his accomplice, had been seen near the village chemist's shop. The pattern begins to take shape. He turned to Alcroft, whose face had grown pale. Sir, I mean to reopen your father's death, figuratively if not literally. The truth may prove less spectral than greed, but no less deadly. That evening Holmes sent 2 telegrams, one to Lestrade at Greystone Hall, instructing him to secure the study and its contents, and another to a chemist in Harley Street whose expertise in toxic analysis Holmes had often employed. As the lamps burned low, I saw Holmes seated by the window, the faint glow of the street lamps outlining his angular features. He spoke without turning. You see, Watson, how the shadow lengthens. A false ghost, a forged haunting, a hidden will, and now, a death that may not have been natural. There is method in this chain of deceit, and somewhere in it moves a man named Ezra Harker, the one ghost still at large. He drew thoughtfully upon his pipe. When we find him, Watson, we shall find the truth. Chapter 8. The Shadow of Ezra. Harker, from the Reminiscences of Dr. John H. Watson. London, at its most mysterious hour, lay shrouded beneath a pall of mist so dense that even the gas lamps glowed like dim embers through a veil of gauze. The rattle of distant hansoms, the cries of the newspaper boys, and the occasional clang of a policeman's truncheon were all dulled to a ghostly murmur by that omnipresent fog. It was amidst this spectral stillness that Holmes and I set forth upon what was to prove one of the most perilous nights of our long association. The telegram Holmes had dispatched that afternoon had borne fruit. At 8:30, a messenger from Scotland Yard arrived with tidings that Ezra Harker, the colonel's former engineer and the suspected artificer of the ghostly devices, had been traced to a mechanical workshop near the docks of Wapping. Lestrade's note was brief and to the point. Harker seen entering a warehouse by the river. Premises let under the name of E.H. Instruments, working at odd hours, electricity involved. Suggest immediate attention. Holmes's eyes glimmered with cold satisfaction as he read the lines. It is as I thought, Watson. The phantom of Greystone was no supernatural visitation, but the work of a man who understands both machines and fear. Come, there is no time to lose. Within 20 minutes we were rattling eastward in a cab, the fog thickening with every mile until the city around us became a blur of shadow and sound. The great warehouses loomed like sleeping beasts along the riverfront, their dark outlines broken by the fitful gleam of a lantern or the dull glow of some furnace within. We alighted before a deserted alley where Lestrade awaited us with 2 constables. His face was grim and wind-burnt. He's inside, Mr. Holmes, he said quietly. We've kept watch since 7. Lights in the upper window, blue ones. Looks like some sort of electrical work. We thought best to wait for you before entering. Holmes gave a curt nod. Quite right, Lestrade. The man we deal with is clever, desperate, and possibly armed. We shall approach with caution. The 4 of us crept along the wet cobbles toward the warehouse door. A faint hum reached our ears, the unmistakable vibration of an active dynamo. Through a crack in the shutters I glimpsed a strange blue light flickering across the walls, and the shadow of a man bent over a workbench. Holmes motioned for silence, then produced from his pocket a small lantern, which he shielded carefully with his hand. By its dim glow I saw the keen intensity of his expression. He examined the lock, then turned to Lestrade. A simple tumbler, if you please." Lestrade nodded to one of his men, who inserted a thin wedge. With a soft click, the door yielded. We slipped inside. The interior was like a laboratory from some infernal dream. Coils of copper wire snaked across the floor. Glass tubes gleamed with a phosphorescent glow, and at the center of it all stood a table strewn with blueprints, tools, and a half-assembled contrivance resembling a man's torso, fashioned from brass and cloth. The solitary occupant looked up, a tall, angular man with a shock of grey hair and eyes that burned with a feverish brilliance. "Ezra Harker!" cried Holmes. The man recoiled, then sprang backward, seizing a lever on the wall. Instantly the air filled with a shrill whine, and sparks leapt from a coil near the ceiling. "Stand back!" he shouted hoarsely. "One step closer, and I'll burn this place to ashes." "Don't be a fool, Harker," Holmes said calmly. "You've played your hand and lost. The ghost of Greystone walks no more." Harker's face twisted with rage. "You think you can understand what I created? A meddling detective. I gave that house a soul. I made the dead speak. Do you know what that means?" "It means," said Holmes coolly, "that you turned your science to villainy and your genius to fraud. You aided Lionel Fenwick in defrauding a man of his inheritance. And perhaps worse. At the name Fenwick, Harker's defiance faltered. He promised me payment, enough to finish my great work. But when the money came, it was short. Always short. Then he demanded more. The ghost, the lights, the voices. He said it must terrify the household, or all was lost." Holmes stepped forward, his voice sharp as steel. "And the colonel? Did you know of his death?" Harker hesitated, his eyes darting between us. "He was dying already. The doctor said as much." "Yet you helped him to die sooner," Holmes said softly. Harker's face blanched. "No, I only mixed a draught to calm his nerves, a harmless sedative. Lionel gave it to him himself." Holmes's expression did not change. "And the powder you provided, what was its composition?" Harker's mouth opened, then closed. He sank onto the bench, his shoulders shaking. "Mercuric chloride," he whispered. "It was for an experiment. I told Lionel not to use it. He swore he wouldn't. But the next morning the colonel was dead." A grim silence fell. Lestrade stepped forward, his voice rough. "That's confession enough for me. Ezra Harker, I'm arresting you in the name of the law for conspiracy and accessory to murder." But Holmes held up a hand. "Not yet, Lestrade. There is more to learn here." He turned to Harker once more. "You spoke of your great work. What was it?" Harker gave a strange, bitter laugh. "To prove that man can master death, that memory itself can be preserved in sound and light. I built the ghost of Greystone not to frighten, but to show that the past could live again. But Lionel turned it to wickedness." Holmes's eyes softened, but only for an instant. "A brilliant mind gone astray. How often have we seen it, Watson?" I nodded, for indeed the man before us was more tragic than villainous, a dreamer undone by the greed of others. Holmes examined the blueprints upon the table. "See here, Watson. The mechanism by which the so-called ghost appeared. A series of concealed mirrors, electric arcs, and timed phonographic cylinders. Ingenious, though diabolical in its purpose." He pocketed several of the papers. "Lestrade, secure these. They will serve both as evidence and as a warning of what science may become in unworthy hands." Harker made no resistance as the officers led him away. He looked back once, and his voice, hoarse with despair, echoed through the dim workshop. "I only wanted to make the dead speak again." Holmes watched him go, then said quietly, "He succeeded, though not as he imagined. The voices of the dead are loud enough when greed gives them tongue." That night, as we rode back through the misty streets, Holmes was unusually silent. The cab wheels splashed through puddles that mirrored the gaslights like broken stars. At length he spoke. "You perceive, Watson, that every ghost story conceals a human motive. Strip away the superstition and you find envy, fear, ambition, the true spirits that haunt mankind. He leaned back, eyes half closed. And yet, he murmured, I cannot but feel a certain pity for Ezra Harker. There was genius in him, and tragedy. Chapter 9. The Secrets of the Iron Key, from the Reminiscences of Dr. John H. Watson. The air in Baker Street the following morning was thick with the scent of tobacco and pipe ash, the usual atmosphere of anticipation in Holmes's sitting room tempered now by a grave hush. Holmes had summoned Lestrade to meet with him, and the table between us was strewn with the Colonel's letters, the will, and the iron key we had recovered from its hiding-place at Greystone Hall. Holmes, seated with his elbows on the table, had been staring for the better part of an hour at that small, unassuming object. Its surface was worn, the iron blackened with age, yet there was a curious intricacy to its wards. "Watson," he said at last, "I am about to perform a test that may lay bare the whole scheme. This key unlocks a mystery that is more than a mere inheritance dispute. It may reveal the truth of Colonel Fenwick's death." Lestrade, seated stiffly in the corner, cleared his throat. "You are going to open the safe, then?" Holmes smiled faintly. "Yes, Inspector, but I beg your indulgence. We must proceed quietly. Lionel Fenwick remains under suspicion, but without proof. This, if correct, will remove all doubt." We repaired at once to Greystone Hall, accompanied by Lestrade and 2 constables. The morning was bright, though the air still carried the damp chill of autumn. The house stood in an uncommon stillness, the great oaken doors closed against the world as if awaiting judgment. Holmes went directly to the study, where the safe, hidden behind the paneling, still waited. The wood bore the marks of years, and the lock had not been touched since the Colonel's death. Holmes knelt before it, the iron key resting in his palm. "Observe, Watson," he said softly, "how a single object, overlooked by the careless, may be the master key to a labyrinth." With a twist the wards gave way and the lock yielded. Holmes drew forth the contents with slow care. A bundle of papers, a small leather case, and, to my astonishment, a folded silk handkerchief embroidered with the Colonel's initials. He placed the papers before us. They were a second testament of the Colonel, and beneath the signatures lay a final note in trembling script. "If this is found, it is because I have been betrayed. Lionel, my nephew, covets my estate and has enlisted a man to conjure my death as a spectre. Beware the false vision. I leave my inheritance to my son, Henry Alcroft, that justice may be done. H.F." Beneath it was a sealed envelope, addressed to Mr. Lionel Fenwick. Holmes broke the seal and read aloud. "I know of your design. You who call yourself my kin, you think to gain by fear. Beware, for every ghost has its day of reckoning." A silence followed, heavy and deliberate. Lestrade leaned forward, his expression stern. "That settles it. Lionel Fenwick is guilty." Holmes held up a hand. "It settles much, Inspector. But not all. For here is the leather case." Inside lay a small phial, its contents a clear liquid, and a scrap of folded paper, upon which was written, "The draught was not meant to kill. Its purpose was to calm, to end the Colonel's pain. But in the wrong hand even mercy becomes murder. H.F." Lestrade looked sharply at Lionel Fenwick, who sat pale and unmoving in the corner. "Where did this come from?" he demanded. Holmes replaced the phial in the case. "From Colonel Fenwick's own hand, and therein lies the truth, that his death was hastened by no accident, but by deliberate design, a design to protect a secret." He turned to us, his voice low and certain. "The ghost was but a mask, Watson. A mask to conceal not only the will, but the crime that gave rise to it. Lionel Fenwick's hand was upon both, but the true motive lies deeper, in fear of exposure, of something far darker than mere inheritance." Holmes rose. "We have the will, the key, the confession, and the proof. It remains only to confront Lionel Fenwick, and to bring the curtain down upon this tragic play. That evening the household gathered in the great hall of Greystone Hall, with Lestrade and Holmes at its head. Holmes laid the documents and key before Lionel, who listened in silence, his face a mask of fury and despair. Holmes's voice rang through the hall. "Mr. Fenwick, you stand accused of conspiracy to commit fraud and accessory to the death of your uncle. Your device of the ghost was but the final act in a long deception. What say you?" Lionel's voice broke in a whisper. "It is true. I sought the will, and I used fear to drive my aunt away. But I did not kill my uncle. That was another's doing." Holmes fixed him with a sharp glance. "Then tell us, who?" The great hall grew still, save for the crackle of the fire. Lionel Fenwick's reply was a single word, spoken almost in desperation. "Harker." Holmes inclined his head. "Indeed, and that is the truth we have sought. The man who conjured the ghost, who wrought illusion and terror, was also the man who stood to profit most from the Colonel's silence. Yet in this case, justice is not the work of vengeance, but of proof." Lestrade stepped forward. "Lionel Fenwick, you are under arrest." Holmes turned to me. "Watson, our work here is done, though the shadow of this affair will linger longer than either of us might wish." I could not disagree, for in that moment I understood Holmes's truth. In the tangled web of human greed and fear, even the purest light is dimmed by shadow. Chapter X. The Final Reckoning. From the Reminiscences of Dr. John H. Watson. The air in Greystone Hall on that October evening was heavy with expectation. The great hall, with its towering beams and flickering hearth, was filled with the household, servants, Lestrade and his officers, Mrs. Fenwick still pale and seated in the shadow, Henry Alcroft quiet but resolute, and Lionel Fenwick sitting stiffly in a carved oak chair, his eyes fixed on the floor. Holmes stood near the hearth, his tall frame wrapped in his grey ulster, the iron key and the Colonel's will laid before him. A hush fell as he began to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen," said Holmes, "we stand at the end of a chain of events most extraordinary, a chain forged by secrecy, ambition, fear, and deception. What began as a death, seemingly natural, has proved to be a tragedy of human making, hidden beneath the veil of superstition." He turned toward the figures gathered before him. Colonel Horace Fenwick, late of the 22nd Regiment, was not merely a man of fortune, but of secrets. In his final days he entrusted the knowledge of those secrets to a will designed to protect his son, Henry Alcroft, from the machinations of those who would supplant him. That will, and the truth it contained, were concealed in a secret compartment within the Conservatory. But one such as Lionel Fenwick could not abide such a revelation. Holmes paced slowly. Thus was the conspiracy hatched. Lionel engaged Arthur Cobb, a soldier of some skill, embittered and poor, to impersonate the ghost of the Colonel. The aim, to frighten Mrs. Fenwick and all others away from Greystone, so that Lionel might take possession of the estate without scrutiny. The machinations of this plot were aided by a man of science, Ezra Harker, whose experiments with electricity and sound made possible the illusion of the ghost. These acts, though ingenious, were not without darker consequence. He fixed his eyes on Lionel Fenwick. "On the night of Colonel Fenwick's death, the draught you administered was no mere sedative. It was mercury chloride, a poison, slow in action, but certain in effect. That act, sir, was not the result of accident or misunderstanding. It was a deliberate step to ensure your uncle's removal, and thus your inheritance." Lionel's face went pale. "I did not kill him. I only wished to frighten him, to make him alter his will." Holmes's voice cut him short. "A most dangerous fantasy, Mr. Fenwick. The result is the same, and the law makes no distinction where such intent exists in the shadow of conspiracy. The letters we have recovered, the will, the confessions of Harker, and your own conduct, speak plainly." He turned to Lestrade. You have the warrant, Inspector. Lestrade inclined his head. Yes, Mr. Holmes. Lionel Fenwick, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, and for the poisoning of Colonel Horace Fenwick. A stir ran through the hall. Mrs. Fenwick wept quietly. Henry Alcroft's eyes were moist with relief, and Lionel Fenwick rose, his face hardened with despair. Holmes continued, addressing the assembly. But the matter does not end in punishment alone. It is the purpose of justice to illuminate as well as to convict. That is why I have summoned you here, to show the truth, that none may be deceived again by the ghosts of the past. He picked up the colonel's sealed envelope, now revealed to contain a last private message. With a deliberate motion, Holmes read aloud, "To those who find this after my death, know this. I feared my nephew's ambition, and I feared that my end would be dishonored. To Henry Alcroft I leave Greystone Hall, that the wrong done to him may be righted. To all others beware the shadow of avarice, which makes of a man a ghost in his own lifetime. Horace Fenwick." Holmes laid the note down. "Thus speaks the colonel beyond the grave, not in sound nor in vision, but in written truth. It is a lesson for us all." Turning to me, he added quietly, "And Watson, that is why I have taken the precaution of securing Harker's blueprints and Cobb's testimony. They stand as proof that even the most fantastic tale may have its root in the plainest fact." Lestrade stepped forward, placing a hand upon Lionel Fenwick's shoulder. "Come along, sir. You'll have time to contemplate your designs in a proper cell." As Lionel was led away, Mrs. Fenwick rose and approached Holmes and Henry Alcroft. Tears were in her eyes, but there was a faint smile upon her lips. "Mr. Holmes," she said softly, "you have done more than solve a mystery. You have restored peace to this house." Holmes inclined his head. "Peace is the reward of truth, madam, and truth is the inheritance of those who seek it without fear." That night, as we returned to Baker Street, Holmes was unusually silent. The streets lay wet and glistening beneath the moonlight, the city breathing softly after the day's tumult. I ventured to speak. "Holmes, do you ever tire of such cases?" He glanced at me with a faint smile. "Never, Watson, for each case is not merely a puzzle, but a study of the human heart, and that is a study without end." As we passed beneath the gas lamps, their light spilling upon the pavement like scattered jewels, I knew that in truth, the ghost in the conservatory was a case that would linger in my memory for many years to come, for it had taught me, as all good cases do, that behind every mystery lies not only the answer, but the shadow of human nature itself. Chapter 15. The Aftermath of Truth, from the Reminiscences of Dr. John H. Watson. The events at Greystone Hall had settled like a storm passing through the moors, sudden, fierce, and leaving silence in its wake. In the days that followed, the village of Evesham seemed changed, the air less charged with speculation, the townsfolk quieter, as if the lifting of a long and terrible shadow had left them uncertain how to resume their lives. At Baker Street, Holmes was as restless as ever. He spent hours poring over the blueprints and notes recovered from Ezra Harker's workshop, marking them with rapid, precise pencil strokes. Lestrade called daily with news of the case, and each time Holmes greeted him with that singular combination of courtesy and impatience which marked him so clearly. For my part, I busied myself with correspondence. Mrs. Fenwick had written to express her gratitude, not only for Holmes's part in securing justice, but also for his attention to her family's honor. I could not help but sense a certain finality in her letter, a sense that the world of Greystone Hall was turning a page. Holmes, meanwhile, had invited Henry Alcroft to Baker Street. It was late one afternoon when Alcroft arrived, his manner quiet but dignified, his brow still furrowed with thought. Holmes greeted him with a nod, offering him a seat beside the fire. "You wish to speak with me, Mr. Holmes?" Alcroft asked. Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Yes. The matter of your inheritance and your future. Justice has been done, but the path forward is seldom simple. Greystone Hall will be yours, Mr. Alcroft, but it will be your duty to restore it, not only as an estate, but as a home." Alcroft inclined his head. "I am prepared, sir. My father's will is clear. I owe it to him to see it fulfilled." Holmes gave a slight smile. "That is well said. And I should add, you owe it to yourself to remember what you have learned. The case of the ghost was not merely a matter of property, but of understanding the human heart. Never lose sight of that lesson." We spoke at length that afternoon, Holmes and I, about the strange interplay of greed and genius that had brought the whole matter to light. He spoke little of the danger, more of the principle, that truth is the finest inheritance of all. In the days that followed, news reached us that Lionel Fenwick had been remanded for trial, charged with fraud, conspiracy, and the poisoning of Colonel Horace Fenwick. The court would be convened at the Old Bailey, and the case promised to be a sensation. Holmes, however, paid little attention to it beyond instructing Lestrade to keep him informed. Instead, he occupied himself with correspondence to certain scientific colleagues, inquiring into the further uses of Harker's devices, not for deception, but for the pursuit of knowledge. There was a faint note of regret in his manner when he spoke of it, as though even in victory there remained a sadness for the waste of a great mind. One evening, as the lamps of Baker Street flickered through the autumn fog, Holmes rose from his chair and stood gazing into the fire. I ventured to ask what occupied his thoughts. "The nature of justice, Watson," he replied at last, without turning. "It is not enough to discover the truth. One must ensure it is heard, and that those who would conceal it are held to account. And sometimes that requires patience. The case of Greystone Hall is not ended, merely paused." He spoke as one who foresaw further work ahead, and I could not doubt that he was right. For in the heart of London, in the minds of men like Harker and Fenwick, there remains a darker matter than any we have yet solved. As I retired that night, the city outside lay in quiet repose, as though it too waited for the final act in this strange affair. Chapter 20. The Trial of Lionel Fenwick. From the Reminiscences of Dr. John H. Watson. The trial of Lionel Fenwick was set for a crisp morning in late November. The Old Bailey was already crowded before the court opened, the air alive with anticipation. Newspaper reporters filled the benches, whispering with barely contained excitement. A throng of onlookers pressed beyond the barriers in the hope of witnessing a scene that promised drama worthy of London's most storied trials. Holmes and I arrived together, without ceremony. Lestrade, already present, gave us a curt nod. There was no doubt that the police regarded Holmes's forthcoming testimony as central to their case. The proceedings began with a formal reading of the charges: conspiracy to defraud, forgery, and the poisoning of Colonel Horace Fenwick. The prosecution's opening statement painted Lionel as a man consumed by greed, whose machinations had led to the death of his own uncle. The defense counsel, a polished and vigorous man, insisted that no proof existed of Lionel's guilt, and that the ghostly apparitions of Greystone Hall were the product of imagination, not science. Holmes was called early. As he rose to give his evidence, there was a perceptible stir in the court. His presence commanded attention. Even the barristers regarded him with a certain measured respect. "Mr. Holmes," began the prosecution, "you claim to have solved this case through deduction. Tell us what led you to your conclusions." Holmes's reply was precise and deliberate. "My lord, gentlemen of the jury, this case is not one of mere accident. It is a matter of sequence, of cause and effect. The strange lights, the sounds in the conservatory, the locked safe, and the sudden death of Colonel Horace Fenwick are not separate incidents. They are parts of a single design. That design was conceived in deceit, carried out by Mr. Lionel Fenwick with the assistance of Ezra Harker and Arthur Cobb. He laid out the evidence systematically. The discovery of the second will, the testimony of Mrs. Fenwick and Henry Alcroft, the blueprints and notes from Harker's workshop, the confession regarding the poison, and the iron key which opened the colonel's safe. Holmes described with meticulous detail the construction of the ghost at Greystone Hall, an apparatus of mirrors, phonographs, and electrical devices designed to produce sound and light without the presence of a living actor. His voice never faltered. "The evidence before you is not circumstantial. It is documentary, demonstrable, and irrefutable. The ghost of Greystone Hall was not the spirit of a dead man, but the invention of a living one. and that living man sought by deception to remove an obstacle to his own ambition. There was a murmur in the court. Holmes paused, and his eyes swept the room. The true cause of Colonel Fenwick's death was not supernatural, but chemical. A draught containing mercuric chloride was administered under the pretense of a sedative. The handwriting, the opportunity, and the motive converge in a single conclusion. Mr. Lionel Fenwick stands guilty. The defense rose in protest, but Holmes was unshaken. His manner was calm, his reasoning unassailable. To those who doubted, he offered the iron key and the colonel's own testament as proof. When cross-examined, Holmes did not falter. He acknowledged the skill of Ezra Harker, lamented the waste of his genius, and insisted that Lionel Fenwick had been the driving force behind the scheme. His testimony was a model of precision, as though he were delivering the final lines of a long-played drama. The courtroom buzzed with fascination. Even the judge, grave and attentive, leaned forward to hear his words. At the close of his evidence, Holmes turned to the jury. "Gentlemen, the case rests not upon theory, but upon truth. And the truth, the whole truth, lies in the facts we have laid before you. Your duty is to see that justice follows." The trial continued for several days. Witness after witness confirmed Holmes's account. Mrs. Fenwick gave moving testimony of her terror. Henry Alcroft spoke of his rightful claim, and of the deception practiced against his father. Cobb, when called, admitted to assisting Lionel Fenwick in the staging of the ghost, though he insisted he had no knowledge of the poison. The culmination came with Lionel's own defense, a denial of premeditated murder, a claim that his actions had been born of desperation rather than malice. Yet the weight of Holmes's evidence proved overwhelming. At last the case rested. The judge addressed the jury with solemnity. Their deliberations were brief. The verdict, guilty on all counts, was returned to the court with little hesitation. A hush fell over the gallery. Lionel Fenwick, pale and weary, was led away to his sentence. Holmes said nothing in court of his satisfaction, nor did Lestrade. But as we left the Old Bailey together, Holmes's voice was quiet and reflective. "Watson, the case of Greystone Hall is ended in a manner that justice demands. But the true lesson remains. Every deception is bound by its own truth, and no ghost can walk forever without the light of reason to dispel it." As we walked through the damp London streets, the fog swirling about our feet, I could not help but feel that Holmes's words carried the weight of a deeper truth, one not merely for courts and juries, but for all who would listen. Chapter 3. Restoration at Greystone Hall, from the reminiscences of Dr. John H. Watson. Winter had taken its slow hold upon London when the matter of Greystone Hall began to settle into its final chapter. The streets were filled with the scent of burning coal and the crispness of frost. Snow lay in patches upon the gas-lit pavements, and the air carried the quiet promise of peace after months of tumult. Holmes and I took a coach to Evesham once more, summoned by Henry Alcroft, who had begun the long work of restoring the hall to its former dignity. It was a journey that gave me time to reflect upon the strange course of events that had brought us here. The conspiracies, the lies, the ghostly apparitions, and the sudden revelations that had unmasked the truth. Greystone Hall, in truth, bore the marks of the ordeal. The conservatory was silent now, its glass panels intact, but stripped of the mechanical contrivances that had brought fear and mystery to its rooms. Servants moved about busily, repairing shutters and cleaning away dust and neglect. There was a quiet industry about the place, a hum of life returning to its ancient stone walls. Henry Alcroft met us at the door, his manner courteous but tinged with relief. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, you honor us with your presence." Holmes inclined his head. "It is good to see the house in order once more. And it is good to see you so resolved, Mr. Alcroft." Alcroft led us through the hall, showing us the rooms restored, the library reopened, and the corridors freed from shadows. "My father would have wished it so," he said softly, and I shall see that his wishes are respected. We came at last to the conservatory. The air was colder here, and the faint scent of winter roses lingered. Holmes examined the glass panels and the floor with his accustomed scrutiny. "The work here is not merely architectural," he said, "but symbolic. The restoration of Greystone Hall is a restoration of truth. And truth, Mr. Alcroft, must be guarded as carefully as any treasure." Henry Alcroft regarded him gravely. "I intend to honor that, sir. There shall be no concealments here, no fear of what lies beneath the surface." Mrs. Fenwick, now recovering her strength, joined us in the hall. She embraced her son with tears in her eyes, her voice trembling with gratitude. "You have given us peace again," she said to Holmes. Holmes inclined his head in modest acknowledgment. "It is not I, madam, who have given peace. It is justice, and the will to find it." We spent the afternoon walking the grounds, the frost crunching beneath our boots, the air clear and sharp. Holmes said little, his gaze wandering over the gardens and into the distance where the mists of the past seemed to recede. Before we departed, Henry Alcroft pressed his hand upon Holmes's arm. "Mr. Holmes, you have done more than solve a case. You have restored my family's honor. I am deeply in your debt." Holmes smiled faintly. "Debt, Mr. Alcroft, is the currency of gratitude. But I ask only that you remember the lesson of this affair, that justice requires vigilance, and that truth is the finest inheritance of all." As we returned to Baker Street, the lamps of London casting their golden light upon the streets, I found Holmes unusually pensive. The case of Greystone Hall had been closed, yet I sensed that in his mind it was far from concluded. That night I wrote in my journal that we had seen justice done, but at a cost, for in the unmasking of the ghost we had uncovered not only the ambition of man, but the fragility of honor itself, and in that knowledge I found both sorrow and solace. Chapter 13. The closing of the case, from the reminiscences of Dr. John H. Watson. The case of the ghost in the conservatory had at last reached its close. London, draped now in winter's quiet, seemed unaware of the extraordinary events that had passed in its shadow. Yet for those who had been touched by the mystery of Greystone Hall, the memory lingered, a testament to human folly, and the curious interplay of science and deception. That evening, as Holmes sat in his familiar armchair by the fire in Baker Street, I set myself to write the final entries in my journal. Holmes was unusually still, his gaze fixed upon the dancing flame, lost in thought. "Holmes," I ventured, "do you ever weary of such cases?" He turned his piercing eyes upon me. "Never, Watson. Each case is but another study, another lesson in the complexities of human nature. This one in particular has been instructive. It has shown that even the most elaborate illusions may be unraveled by patient inquiry and steadfast attention to truth." He spoke in that quiet tone I have come to recognize as the voice of reflection rather than deduction. We have dealt here not only with a crime but with the spectre of ambition itself. Lionel Fenwick sought to transform the inheritance of a family into the inheritance of his own desire. Harker sought to turn artifice into immortality. Cobb sought a share in a scheme that was beyond his understanding. And Colonel Fenwick, he sought peace in the knowledge of his own integrity. Holmes paused, as if weighing his own words. Justice, Watson, is a rare thing. We imagine it as a certainty, but it is ever at risk of being clouded by passion, prejudice, or fear. Our duty, your duty and mine, is to clear that cloud wherever we find it. I nodded, deeply conscious that in this case, as in all others, Holmes's labors had been guided not by chance, but by an unrelenting search for clarity. Later that night, as the lamps of Baker Street were extinguished and the city slept, Holmes rose and stood at the window, gazing out into the quiet streets. I could not hear his thoughts, but I knew that the case of Greystone Hall, with its ghosts, its deceptions, and its final revelation, would remain with him for many years to come. I, for my part, resolved to record it faithfully so that others might learn from it. not merely the mechanics of detection, nor the marvels of deduction, but the deeper truth that behind every mystery lies the shadow of human nature itself, a shadow that may only be dispelled by the light of reason. Thus closed the matter of the ghost in the conservatory. The whole stands restored, the guilty brought to justice, and the living left to reflect upon the fragile inheritance of honor. As I lay down my pen, I am reminded of Holmes's own words. The world is full of obvious things which nobody by any chance ever observes. And so, dear reader, I leave this case to you, with the hope that you will observe the truth wherever it may hide, and that you will remember that the greatest mystery is not that of the supernatural, but of the human heart. Dr. John H. Watson, M.D., Chapter 15th, Shadows and Reflections, from the Reminiscences of Dr. John H. Watson. It was some weeks after the trial of Lionel Fenwick that Holmes and I found ourselves once more at Baker Street, settled into our accustomed evening ritual. The case of Greystone Hall, in its breadth and consequence, had already become a matter of discussion among our friends. Lestrade had spoken of it at Scotland Yard as one of the finest examples of deduction he had encountered, while Mrs. Hudson insisted it had been the most extraordinary affair in her long service at 221B. For my part, I could not shake the sense that the case had left a subtle mark upon Holmes himself. His manner was quieter, less inclined toward sardonic humor. He seemed, at times, to dwell upon the moral lessons as much as upon the mechanics of detection. That evening, as the lamps threw their mellow light upon the sitting-room, Holmes stirred his pipe absently, eyes fixed upon the street outside. "Watson," he said at length, "I have been thinking of the nature of deception. It is a strange thing that we so willingly accept what we wish to be true and reject what is uncomfortable. The ghost of Greystone Hall was a testament to that truth." I nodded. "And yet, Holmes, we proved the deception." "Indeed," he replied, "but not before it wrought damage, not only to property but to trust. That is the shadow every case leaves behind. Justice is measured not only in conviction but in the restoration of that trust." We spoke at some length about the Oldcrofts, about Greystone Hall itself, and about the strange alchemy of fear and ambition that had brought about the Colonel's death. Holmes spoke with uncommon gravity of the dangers of secrecy, and of the courage required to face the truth. As I listened, I realized that this case, unlike many others, had become for Holmes more than a matter of deduction. It had become a matter of conscience. Holmes rose at last, setting aside his pipe. "Watson, the work of a detective is never done. There will always be shadows to investigate, illusions to dispel. But Greystone Hall reminds me that the deepest shadows lie within ourselves." I found no words to reply. There was a solemnity about him that evening, a rare stillness that bespoke the weight of his reflections. We sat together in silence, the city outside muffled in fog. It seemed fitting that our conversation should end not with a flourish, but with quiet contemplation. In the days that followed, Holmes returned to his chemical experiments, to his violin, and to the occasional letter from clients with strange tales. I returned to my medical practice, though with a new awareness of the curious interplay between fact and illusion. And Greystone Hall, with its restored conservatory and cleared grounds, became once more a home, but one whose history carried with it the memory of shadows. As for us at Baker Street, we turned the page on this case and prepared for the next, confident that whatever mysteries may arise, the truth, pursued with patience and reason, will always find its way to light. Thus ends the tale of the ghost in the conservatory. Dr. John H. Watson, M.D., Chapter 16th. The Last Word, from the Reminiscences of Dr. John H. Watson. Some months had passed since the events at Greystone Hall had been laid to rest, and London was already turning its attention to other matters. Yet for Holmes and myself, the case of the ghost in the conservatory lingered in memory, not as a matter of trial or verdict, but as a study of human nature. It was on a quiet evening, the gas lamps casting long shadows across Baker Street, that Holmes spoke again of the affair. He had returned from an errand at Scotland Yard, and was seated at his usual place by the fire, his violin resting untouched at his side. "Watson," he began, "there is a curious quality to certain cases. They do not end when the court pronounces judgment, but rather when the lesson they contain is understood. Greystone Hall is one such a case." I stirred my tea and looked at him. "And what lesson is that, Holmes?" He regarded me with that calm precision of his. "That truth, like a light in the fog, may be hidden, even from those who seek it. It requires patience, attention, and the willingness to confront what we would rather avoid. The ghost was but a symptom of deeper flaws, greed, secrecy, and pride." He rose and moved toward the window, looking out into the night. "The human heart is a most perplexing mystery, Watson. No machine, no chemical, no deductive art can fully reveal it. Yet in our pursuit of truth we come closest to understanding it." There was a silence between us, not of absence but of contemplation. I could hear the muffled sounds of London beyond the street. The carriage wheels, the distant murmur of voices, the occasional bark of a dog. Holmes turned then, his expression softened. "It is my belief that there are some truths which serve not merely to solve a case, but to illuminate a life. Greystone Hall was such a truth. We have seen how illusions may mislead, how ambition may corrupt, and how justice may redeem." I could not help but reflect upon the words. They seemed to sum the nature of our work, and of life itself. As the night deepened, Holmes returned to his chair. He lifted his violin and played softly, a melody both somber and serene. The music seemed to linger, as though carrying with it the last echoes of that curious case. And so, dear reader, I lay down my pen. I have chronicled this affair as faithfully as memory allows, so that the world may know, not merely the solution of a mystery, but the lesson that lies beyond it. That lesson, I think, is this, that no shadow lasts forever, and that reason, patience, and integrity remain the surest guides in a world full of illusions. Thus closes the account of the ghost in the conservatory, a case of deception, revelation, and the enduring pursuit of truth. Dr. John H. Watson, M.D.